Welcome to the Commercial Property Podcast. My name is Suzi Carter. I am a chartered surveyor. I've been involved in commercial property in the UK for 30 years and I've done hundreds of commercial property deals. I'm here to be your guide through the commercial property market, whether you're an experienced investor or whether you're literally thinking about dipping your toe in the world of commercial real estate. I will be here talking to you about all kinds of things commercial real estate in the UK, and I've also got some fantastic guest experts who are joining me. So please do subscribe if you'd like to follow, and if you'd like any more help or information on commercial real estate, please do click www.suzicarter.com, which is my website, and you can find out all the ways I can help you. So stay tuned for this week's episode. Welcome back to the Commercial Property Podcast, and today we're going to be talking about trends in all kinds of things that can affect your commercial investing. And you might be kind of saying, well, this is a property podcast, why are we talking about trends? Well, the reason is that commercial property is occupied by businesses, and the fundamentals of commercial investing is that if there's good demand for a certain type of property or a certain type of real estate, and more demand than supply, so basic economics, that leads to better leases, better tenants, and better rents. And so we're really, really interested in what businesses are interested in. So, gone are the days when I started in commercial real estate 30 years ago now, when you used to have a commercial property and you would know you would let it because there was a lot less supply. The market was such that you'd get 20, 25-year leases, 5-yearly upward only rent reviews. You wouldn't ever talk to your tenants. And the whole market has completely shifted. We're 30 years on now. And the fact is there's winners and there's losers in commercial real estate. And there's winners and losers in business. And we want to buy the type of property where there's winning tenants. We want to have within that kind of tenant type, we want to pick the tenants who are going to give us the longest leases, pay the best rents, and ultimately be in the property for as long as possible. And so how do we do that? Well, we do that by understanding our tenants businesses. And if we're investing in a certain type of sector or location, understanding all the trends and everything that's affecting that investing location. So when a tenant goes to a particular town or city, they don't just go, yeah, that feels about right. There's usually a very strong driving force why they want to locate in that particular area. So let's take retail, for example. Retailers, let's take a brand like blue chip retailers. They have a demographics office. They might not call it that. They might call it a research department or whatever. But basically, their location choices are just not random. They are highly, highly strategic. It might be that they're on an expansion drive and they want to be in every shopping centre in the UK. It might be that they're looking at particular locations where there's an hour to an hour and a half drive time, and they won't locate in they won't kind of affect their trade by having two stores in that location. So they locate in a city where people will come and visit them and like a destination city. And so what they'll be doing is they'll be looking at drive times, they'll be looking at footfall, they'll be looking at demographics to make sure that their customer is the right one. And then within that, they'll be looking at, okay, so for this particular location, for the amount of people that will be visiting, for the demographics, what's the right size of store? Because in a big city centre, maybe on Oxford Street or Regent Street or, central Manchester, you may well have a significantly larger store than you might have in a wealthy but smaller town. So all these things matter, and it doesn't have to be a wealthy location. If you're a discounter, then it might be that you want to go to an area where there's lots and lots of chimney pots, lots and lots of customers. But maybe the average wage is kind of lower than some other locations. So It's very complex the way kind of blue chip retailers look at this. And then also, SME, smaller operators, they don't operate entirely on random. Yes, it's much more to do with maybe where they live and the places that they know. But equally, they all want to be in the right place on the high street. They all want to make sure that they can trade properly, because all of this is ultimately about how well they can trade. If we take offices, for example, um, all kinds of things affecting offices since COVID. We've got leases ending, we've got working from home. Very common one in offices is locating near the chief exec's home. They don't want to travel too far. It might be there's a particular type of worker that you want to be near. So Manchester or Cheltenham or central London. For tech, for example, you're moving to where the tech workers are. Industrial, you want to be near lots of chimney pots for the workers. You want to be near arterial roads. You might want to be near your main customer bases, whatever it might be. And then, what kind of eaves height do you need on a building? Do you need to bring your office function in? Do you need a mezzanine floor? So it's complex. And if you look at it as a kind of whole sector, it's obviously there's lots and lots of different factors governing it. But one of the skills in commercial investing, especially if you're trying to find a niche to investing, is to understand what's happening in investing locations, understand what's happening in sectors, understands what's happening in the global and UK and local economies, and then understand kind of how that affects your tenant and your tenant type. And that really is a skill. So, for example, we now see significant downsizing of office footprints and more need for flexibility. And obviously, what's evolved from that is much more of the co-working space, serviced offices, etc. Monday, sort of Tuesday to Thursday type culture and multi-purpose kind of office suites. Class E has meant that lots of different uses can co-locate under one roof and under a Class E use class. So you might have some health, you might have some offices, etc. And we're generally seeing a trend of repurposing offices, which we've been seeing for quite some time, to be fair. But in certain locations, like, for example, the City of London, we're seeing a willingness from the city to consider the repurposing of secondary offices into serviced apartments or apart hotels. They don't really like buy-to-let type permanent homes, but they do quite like kind of, serviced apartments or kind of Airbnb type operators. And obviously that's being caused by a very specific, COVID has meant that, people want to work from home. Some businesses are saying, no, is there a drive back to the office? So in the office sector, things to look out for is, is there a general theme and a drive back to the office? Our footprint shrinking. There's definitely a race to grade A space from operators, from blue chip operators who want more renewables and to save costs and to tick their ESG credentials. So, really complex trends that are happening as a sector as a whole. And then you've got these kind of very locational factors, like you want to locate near tech workers and tech customers. In Manchester, rents for offices in the tech sector have gone up by about 40% because there's so much demand, because people want to, cluster like with like. Tech businesses want to cluster together. Same in Cheltenham. Cheltenham Council's trying to encourage the benefit of having GCHQ there. And therefore, encouraging tech businesses to come there. They're looking at redeveloping a whole tract of land for tech businesses and encouraging inward investment from the US, etc. So there's location-specific factors as well. What's happening in that particular location? How much supply is there versus the demand? And obviously that will affect your rent, the kind of lease terms that you can get. So it's super, super, super important. And then obviously we've got everything happening in retail. So, kind of rationalizing your portfolios, lots of closures, and big brands going by the wayside, like a lot of department stores, repurposing of the department stores. So, for example, in Gloucester, the former Debenhams is now University of Gloucestershire campus. They've spent the last couple of years completely redeveloping that. They've got a mix of uses in there, but it's bringing students into the city, and that can only be a good thing for the city centre. So, IKEA are going into city centres in former House of Frasers and Debenhams. So, understanding kind of what's happening in each sector and then applying it to different investing locations is really important. But if you really, really want to spot the best opportunities in commercial, then it's about spotting which trends are really kind of going to be future-proofed. And this is where the skill is really. It's really understanding trying to look forwards. And sometimes we're not always going to get it right, but there's some which are just common sense. So the reason why a lot of money is piled into industrial in recent years is because there was a lot of money in retail and offices. And I think there's a general feeling, and I think it's true, that industrial is much more future-proofed in terms of, the rise of online shopping, logistics, data centers, life sciences, cold storage, but also kind of smaller operators who want to locate their whole businesses in a very accessible location, in very flexible units, and which are very accessible to road networks. So that's the reason why the industrial sector has really, been very future-proofed. And what we found after COVID was a lot of pension funds and high net worth kind of pivoting from kind of shopping centres, retail parks into industrial. And that's why yields went crazy kind of in 2021, 2022, because there was it was almost like hope value being built into the yields.
This episode is brought to you by Bond Finance Limited, your trusted partner for commercial property mortgage solutions. Are you an experienced residential property investor about to diversify into commercial property, looking for funding options? Bond Finance can help. Whether you're planning to expand, refinance, or make a major property investment, Bond Finance provides expert advice with access to a wide range of lenders, from high street to specialist. Book a free discovery session today to explore how we can tailor commercial funding solutions to your unique investment strategy. Visit www.bondfinanceltd.co.uk and take the next step in your commercial finance journey.
And the UK PLC is putting their money behind life sciences and research. And so that's why the kind of Oxford to Cambridge corridor is being encouraged so much. So, if you're looking for locations to invest in, that might be quite a good bet because, Rachel Reeves has already said that she's investing in infrastructure between those two locations, probably going to relax planning consents in that area, basically to bring these businesses in. Renewables is another one. It's difficult to see a world where renewables isn't going to be really strong. So are there particular locations where this is being, where renewables are being manufactured, or there's factories? What about very specific locations like GCHQ in Cheltenham, or around airports or around ports? Around airports, what you tend to see is very airport related businesses. And, if we see, for example, the expansion of Gatwick for a second runway, then, what's the impact that going to be? And when we're looking at trends, when we're looking at what's happening in local areas, we need to be really mindful of what's being planned as well. So you might be the only industrial estate in town, but in the local plan, are there plans for other ones? Is there land allocated? Are there plans coming forward? Because all that's going to affect supply and demand in your particular locations. And, if you're in a customer-based business, what are customers going to be looking for in 10 years' time? What are the kind of businesses that are going to be super future-proof? So, for example, on the high street, we're looking at service-based businesses where, they're not reliant on online shopping, not going to be threatened by online shopping. So service-based and also experiential. If you can't get experiences like dining out and having experiences with your friends, AI experiences, going to the cinema, although obviously that is kind of being affected by streaming. But, so what do cinemas do to add an element of experiential What's different about sitting at home on your sofa watching Netflix versus sitting in a cinema? What else can cinemas do to make that experience even more whole? Retailers, I think so many retailers are still kind of doing racks and racks of clothes without maybe thinking about how they could integrate dwell time. So could they put a coffee shop in there, personal shoppers, complementary uses, making the whole thing more experiential. There's a reason why shopping centres have events programs now, why they have a big proportion of food and beverage and leisure, because that increases dwell time. It makes people visit, when they might not need to if it's just shops. So again, there's these trends in different sectors that really affect where and what we want to invest in. And we need to be really mindful of this. And, it might sound really overwhelming if you're thinking about the commercial sector as a whole, but ultimately, this is where niching comes in. If we can understand these trends and what's happening, when we're assessing our niches, we can assess it against what's happening globally and also locally. And also thinking, is this going to be future-proofed? Is this type of use going to be future-proof? Because, you can have a commercial unit and you can have like a sticking plaster that goes over it. But, is that sustainable long-term? So a great example of this is in industrial. There's certain locations where properties which are maybe around 7,000 square feet, there's actually not that much demand for them of a certain, more secondary specification. There's actually not that much demand for them, and therefore they're being sold for quite cheap kind of rates per square foot. But if you can subdivide that space, then suddenly basically that customer base, that tenant base, isn't being catered for in the slightest, because there's just not enough small units to cater for them. So therefore, they're willing to pay almost double the rent. So this doesn't work everywhere, but it does work in quite a few locations. So these, SME businesses, so you're not going to get blue chip, are willing to pay, significantly more, because you're catering for a size that just doesn't really exist in the market, and therefore the scarcity value means that they will pay more. Equally, for those kind of size units, there's a big market for owner occupiers. So if you're a trader, could you perhaps divide those units up and just sell them to owner occupiers? That'd be a nice kind of flipping type strategy, and if you think about, say, a tenants paying £10,000 to £15,000 a year versus buying a unit for 250,000, like, you don't need to do the maths for too long to work out the payback on that, and the fact that actually the real estate at the end is probably worth investing in. So it's very complex when we're looking at commercial. It's not like residential where, there's a house, there's always going to be someone who loves to live in the house. We'd rather have somebody living in the house that will pay a higher rent, but ultimately the rent's the rent. It's a house, it looks nice or it doesn't look nice. It's quite straightforward. With commercial, you have to understand the subtleties of your market. You need to understand the subtleties of the economy, the sector, the location. And we bring this all in together. Now, whilst this can feel a little bit overwhelming, I've had hundreds of clients now that have really got under the skin of this. If you do this properly, you can find a niche and then you can absolutely clear up. So it's a bit like slowing down to speed up. It's about kind of spending a bit of time to work out exactly what you want to invest in, something where you're going to be able to let them really, really easily on good leases to good tenants on good rents. Versus kind of rushing into something and not really understanding it, and then maybe being left with an empty unit. That's the difference. And then obviously once you've found a niche, you can just kind of rinse and repeat that particular strategy. So, it's really worth slowing down to speed up and doing research, like checking with commercial agents where, one great question to ask commercial agents is, well, where are you seeing loads of demand from tenants at the moment? What's getting good rents, good lease lengths? Now, they won't always kind of reveal that on the first blush, but it's a nice casual question to bring into viewings when you're going around with commercial agents. And once you get good at this stuff, and it doesn't take too long, you will literally see niches, you will see trends everywhere you're going. You will see write-ups of towns that have been voted the best in the best in the UK. You will, the best shopping street in the UK, and you're like, oh, niche alert. Let me go and have a look at that. You will see industrial estates that just somehow seem to have an advantage on others in terms of location or in terms of tenant mix. You will also see perhaps some really kind of vague niches that you just never really thought of before. But if you think about all the different types of businesses in the UK and the world for that matter, there are some that don't fall into our sectors of leisure, hospitality, retail, office, industrial, and actually they sit outside that. They kind of got little categories of their own. The sui generis use class is a good example of that. And within those kind of niches that nobody really thinks about are these businesses that kind of really aren't mainstream. Again, there are incredible opportunities to look at the niches. So I guess what the message I'm trying to get across to you really through this podcast is that it's worth kind of just getting your reticular activating system working. Read local newspapers, speak to local agents, look at what's letting really quickly, look at drive around, get in the car. I think we all try and be desktop warriors and do our desktop research. I'm as guilty as everybody else of that. But whenever I actually get out in the car, take your family to a particular town for the weekend and have some fun while you're at it. But don't just do it at your desk, because some of these locations, investing locations, parts of town doing really well, other parts aren't. So you just really need to get under the skin of investing locations. And really the best way to shortcut that is to get out and look at them physically. When I was in the corporate world, we used to call them first gear inspections, where sometimes you could just drive past and just get a flavour of what's going on. So hopefully this has helped you today in terms of understanding some of these trends that are happening and how you might be able to bring this into your investing. I would strongly suggest that you kind of pursue this as a way of kind of looking at your niche. And on the board, we do spend the first session going through niches and what's happening in markets and giving some examples of these things, because ultimately if you can nail a niche early on, then the deals will just follow and the tenants will obviously ultimately follow, which is what gives you the capital growth on your investment. So happy investing, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Commercial Property Podcast.